Hello and welcome to another episode at Go Beyond Sports with me, Sonali Gupta. And today we have an extremely interesting guest, somebody who makes sports players who they are. With us today is Mr. Heath Matthews. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Sonali. Thanks for having me.
Heath began as team physiotherapist for professional rugby, soccer, athletics, and cycling teams in South Africa while based out of Kings Park Sports Medicine Center in Durban from 2003 to 2006. He has also served as director of performance for the Middle Champions Trust and has worked with some of the biggest names of Indian sports industry, Sania Mirza and Mahesh Bhupati. He was also the physiotherapist of Indian Olympic squad in 2008 Beijing Olympics. His idea, GeoFit, evolved from a basic rehab software for physiotherapists into a full-fledged athlete monitoring system that can be used by coaches, athletes, and a team in every aspect of their game. The software has been used by Glenmark Aquatic Foundation for swimming and by Tata Trusts for hockey successfully in India. Thank you so much for being here. Heath, I'm going to start with this question, which I ask not only our guests who are sports players, but everybody who's connected to sports. Why sports? What about sports interests you to be engaged in it?
It's a good question. It's an evolving question. I used to play a lot of sports when I was young. I think in South Africa, we had a natural school system that encouraged youngsters to play sports. So from as early as 7 years old, you were given the chance to run on an athletics track or play some soccer or cricket or whatever. And I just naturally found that I really enjoyed to play a lot of sports. So my school years, I was playing sports, whichever sport I could play as frequently as I could play it. With the dream of like every youngster of becoming a professional one day and representing South Africa and running around on a cricket pitch or a rugby field or whatever. And then, yeah, for me, sort of that journey evolved after my first knee surgery. So I tore my meniscus when I was 17 playing rugby, and then went into the whole physio surgery rehab world, and then realized, hey, there's pretty cool careers out here. And then as things evolved, obviously my dreams of becoming an athlete were not realizing. And then I thought to myself, this is, I really want to get into a profession of something to do with sports. And that's where, luckily, I got the opportunity as a physio, and then that groomed into sports physiotherapy. And then I was able to just sort of grow things from there. I think the reason why I like being involved in sports is because, it helps us to be fit and healthy. I think, if you are engaged in regular exercise, it definitely helps your outlook on life. It helps you to manage stress. It helps you to feel better about yourself. Your thought processes are a lot more coherent, I find. There's just so many physical, emotional, and psychological benefits to being involved in sports. And naturally, coming from an interest in sport, that was that was a natural choice for me. And then I think just going forward, as my science and my scientific brain has kind of evolved, I just love the idea of the mechanics of performance. How do you reach a specific point? I was having a conversation with somebody earlier today, and I was saying, I'm less interested in watching the Olympics and more interested in the process between the Olympic Games, the 4 years between those two competitions. What do we need to do to help the next crop of youngsters be able to do well at the next Olympics? To me, that's way, way, way more exciting than actually watching the competition itself, which is a bit of a weird thought process. But that's where my passion in sports lies, is sports performance and sports analytics.
So then what really is the correlation between sports and physiotherapy, and how important do you think it is in this context of sports in modern era when we talk about the limits to which a human body can actually push itself?
So if you look at sports and you look at sports performance, and even if you just look at participation, really, the way I look at things is the athlete is at the center, and around the athlete is a big halo. In fact, the latest software that we're about to launch, which is a fully fledged athlete management software, is actually called Halo Fit. And it's around that concept, right? So the athlete is in the middle, and everybody who works with that athlete has a role to play. So the coach has their role, the physio has their role, the nutritionist, the psychologist, the strength and conditioning coach, the parents, the friends, the peer network, the sports body themselves. There's so many different people that have a role to play and influence that particular individual in how they evolve and how much they reach their natural potential as an athlete. So for a physiotherapist, we are it's an overstatement, but we're the fuddy-duddies in that little ecosystem, because we come from a very protectionist mindset. We are trained to diagnose injuries, treat them, rehabilitate them, and then eventually, if we're good physios, we hand them back to the coaches and the trainers in good working order again, right? So we're on one side of the spectrum, looking after injury prevention and rehab and stuff. And then you've got coaches and trainers on the other side of that spectrum, and they're pushing athletes to get the best out of them. So it becomes this ecosystem of push, pull, manage. And at the end of the day, it gives the best result for the athlete. So we're the protectionists.
So is this idea then kind of limited when people only talk about and look at physiotherapy only in terms of a post-injury process, rather than actually looking at it pre-injury, where it is more of prevention rather than going to a physiotherapist after you've had an injury?
Yes. So sports and playing sports, just general movement in itself, even if you remove the concept of sports, movement is a language. So if you are very good at movement language, you end up being a very good athlete. If you're not so good at that language, you end up not being as good an athlete. So our role is to help you from a very early age to first understand how well is your body moving naturally. There's something that I love to refer to, which is the movement pyramid. So there's 3 levels to that pyramid. The base of that pyramid is called movement competency. So that is your joint mobility, your muscle flexibility, your balance, your stability, and your strength. Do you have proper movement in that foundation of the pyramid? If you have any weakness in flexibility or mobility or stability or balance or whatever, sure as nuts, I give it to you in writing, you're going to get injured far more regularly than other athletes that you're playing with in your team or in your peer group or whatever. When we move into the middle of that rung, you start looking at movement capacity. So are you able to do that movement, and then can you do it over and over and over and over again so that you do it consistently well? And then finally is your movement perfection or your performance or those kinds of things. And that's where your speed, agility, and power, that's where they belong, at the apex of the pyramid. So the physio's role is not only to say, oh, here's your injury, this is the injury, this is how it happened, this is what we're going to do to fix it. It's also a preventative role before the injury comes along, to say, well, you're weak in these areas and you need to strengthen yourself in these areas to be able to prevent injuries from happening more easily when you participate in sport. So for a physiotherapist, there's a preventative component, and then there's a curative component as well. And traditionally, we've always been, stereotyped as the curative and less involved in the preventative. But certainly over the last sort of 15 to 20 years, physios have been evolving this idea about how do I actually look at identifying problems before they actually become injuries.
So is that also one of the most common mistakes that a lot of aspiring physiotherapists are probably committing, where they're not looking at the aspect of the entirety of performance rather than only looking at it as an injury-based occupation?
Yeah, I think, physiotherapists are like pretty much every other professional out there, in that when you start off your career, you're learning your foundation. And over your 4 to 6 years of getting trained up in physiotherapy and your first couple of years out of physiotherapy, really what you're learning is just to get a big, broad experiential base and build on your theoretical knowledge. as you go along in your career and you get older and older, you learn to fine tune and titrate. What are the things that get me my performance with this athlete or with this kind of an injury? And what are the things that, tend to just be a bit of a waste of time or not very effective at all? And I think for all young physiotherapists, the mindset should be to gain as much knowledge as possible. And particularly in the first 5 years of your career, it's all about making sure you are mentoring and interning under the best people in your particular profession that you can get access to. I had one of my youngsters who put a post on social media today. He's just about to jump on an airplane to go to the Olympic Games, right? And he said, and he shows it in his post, he says, I had these job opportunities and I declined them because I realized that if I stuck in this environment that I was in and I was able to fast track my knowledge and my understanding and my skills, that it would have a tenfold improvement in terms of finance, in terms of being able to get the kind of jobs that I wanted. And I think that's the key thing for youngsters is don't chase money, chase skill. And if you get very skillful at being a physiotherapist quicker than everybody else, you'll end up with the better jobs and you'll end up with the better fulfillment in terms of work at a much quicker rate.
Right. And how important today is then the role of technology in sports physiotherapy? And while you also speak about Geo and Halo, how important have they now become as a part of top high performing athletes and even the kids who are just starting off?
So there's two aspects to being good at something. The first thing is having a very big knowledge base in that thing. So if you're very knowledgeable, that already means that you're on the right road. But over and above that knowledge is the understanding of how to apply it. So if you're a good batsman and you can hit a cricket ball very well, it doesn't mean that you automatically chase every single cricket ball and hit it out the park, right? You got to look and you've got to see, yes, I know when to hit the right cricket ball. I know when to understand when to play shots and when to be defensive. It's the same thing in every profession as well. So as physiotherapists, it's very, very important to develop a large skill base and knowledge base. And then on top of that, apply that knowledge over and over and over and develop your experiential base, because that's the art of what you do. That's where the performance lies. So with what I've been trying to do over the last 8 years is I realized that I could go from one project to the other, train up a set of people, then move on to a new project, right? And that once you move on, there's this lull, there's this lack of continuity in that progression. So the reason for that is the knowledge in that environment. So Halo Fit, GeoFit, Heath Matthews Physio, what they are is knowledge-based platforms. We're just trying to take data from the coach, from the physio, from the strength and conditioning specialist, from the athlete themselves, and aggregate all of that data into one place so we don't lose any information. And then make sure that that information is available for all of the various stakeholders at the right time so that they can then use that information to make informed decisions. And I think that is where technology is going to start to rapidly move towards helping sports progress, right? We've got wearable technology coming in, we've got software, we've got video analytics, we've got all kinds of things happening in terms of nutrition, and just about anything that you can think of. Technology is really ramping up the service delivery, the quality of that specific area. So yeah, I'm big into tech. I really, really think that technology is the future of performance.
So do you see any other area where technology can actually increase the effectiveness of training for the sports players or the athletes, or just even generally for a normal human being who just enjoys his sport?
Look, I mean, if you look at the bicycles that were used in the Tour de France 50 years ago, and you look at the bicycles today, you look at the running shoes that runners used to use 50 years ago and the running shoes that they use today. You look at the surfaces that cricketers are playing on, the kind of grass with the kind of drainage and, you know, the specific type of grass. And, you know, every single sport that you look at, there are a myriad of technological things that have just already become embedded within that sport. Where I see the biggest opportunity going forward is for us to figure out how to scale technological inputs and to do it in a wise and efficient manner. So that doesn't necessarily mean that I go and lay 50 synthetic athletics tracks all over the state of Maharashtra and miraculously hope that, that will mean that we produce India's next track and field champion in 4 years from now. It's about how do we, what is the wisest technology to embed into the rural areas, into, grassroots programs. Maybe it's not actually tracks. Maybe it's actually making sure that the smartest coach sitting in Bombay or Pune or in Germany for that matter is able to get his training program down into the smallest districts of Maharashtra, where a very young and excited coach can then apply those training concepts to his youngsters, who then do much better and then move up the ranks and eventually land up on a synthetic track in Bombay. So those are just, smart ways. And, if you give that coach proper nutrition advice, and you give that coach proper strength and conditioning advice, and that coach proper rehabilitation advice when their athlete tears their hamstring, right? All of a sudden, the opportunities for that athlete to exit their sport because of, bad coaching, injuries, bad nutrition, a number of different things are reduced. And so all of a sudden you create more athletes moving through the system from grassroots up into the development program and then and eventually up into the elite program. So, my thought process on this is, which tech do we use for grassroots? Get it out there so that information flows to the people who need that information. And then from there, use technology to monitor athletes so that they are funneled into the system so that they eventually get to where they need to get to.
So do you think, in your experience in being around, compared to other countries, the state and development of sports fitness spectrum in India is kind of also moving towards all of this right now?
We are getting better. Certainly when I got to India 20 odd years ago, it was definitely not the case. We were very, very far behind. In some sports, you could consider us world leaders. I think in terms of shooting, I think in terms of cricket, we are up there with the best of the best. Possibly a couple of other sports are very close. I think we're very close in terms of weightlifting, wrestling, boxing, and in other sports we're quite far off. I think for us though, we are too heavily reliant on the government and the Sports Authority of India and the sports federations, and everybody else needs to show us how to do stuff, right? It's up to them to make us the next Olympic champion, and it's really not. I think that whole process starts with us, the athletes, their parents, their grassroots coaches, their support network. If we're out there, if we're really networking like what you're doing, Sonali, right? You're bringing the aggregation of knowledge to people who need it, right? Without that knowledge, they can't do what they need to do. So it's very, very important that we do that, and we help them that way.
Right. So in your experience, how much awareness we also have towards mental exhaustion, and especially in Indian sports culture in general, how much concern or attention are we giving to mental stress during practice or to a tournament, especially when it comes to these grassroots level players who really are going through a lot more?
Look, sports psychology is very important, and mental toughness and the approach that I bring to my sport is, at the end of the day, the most important aspect that will help you to reach where you need to go. If you have a very low self-esteem, if you have poor confidence, if you have a lot of self-doubt, if you don't have very clear goals in mind of what you want to achieve this season, next season, the next 5 seasons, you're not going to be able to really get far, because you're going to be subject to whatever is in your environment and in which direction your environment makes you go. right? Whereas if you have good guidance from mental coaches, and those can sometimes be your actual sport coach. Those are sometimes the best sports psychologists in the industry. Is just your coach, your parents, your peer support group. If you're getting good guidance from people that help you to really have clear ideas where you want to go, then that's absolutely, fundamental. But, every other aspect needs to be taken care of. Your coaching, your strength and conditioning, all of these other aspects are extremely, extremely important.
Right. So do you think then this situation that we all have found ourselves in for the last 2 years or almost 2 years in respect to the pandemic has actually, the stop and the start and fitness regime has actually not been as helpful as it seems? Like, what's your take on it? Is it that they have got the time to go through the rehabilitation and build up, or is it that the stop and the start has actually not been good for them, whether it is physically or mentally?
Yeah, unfortunately, the last 2 years has been a very unique environment for a lot of people. In fact, it's probably teaching the majority of us what happens to people when they face major injuries and are out for extended periods of time. I think this has been I'm hoping it's been a very isolated incident, and that you'll find that this won't happen again in future. I think technology has really stood up and helped a lot of people to be able to maintain training standards through, using various platforms like Google Meet or Zoom or whatever to continue remote training, remote monitoring. Software like athlete management software allows people to get training programs instantly to other people. We've integrated videos so that they know how to do all the different techniques. There's a whole bunch of things that have come in to mitigate the damage that would otherwise have been caused, and it would have been much, much worse. I think going forward, though, especially in an Indian context, we need to make sure that we are trying to take big strides forward. I had a conversation today with somebody within a specific sport in India who had said to me, you know what, we're a little bit disheartened because going into this Olympic Games, we were feeling very confident. Our athletes were doing much better. Just generally speaking, we had a far greater presence going into this Olympic Games. And yet when we look at what happened in competition, we realize that if we've moved this far forward in the last 4 years, our competitors have moved this far forward. So net, we're actually going backwards. All right. And I think that's a very, very important thing to keep in mind if we want to see long-term results in sports in India outside of cricket. And that is that we need to really keep an eye what is happening around the rest of the world and how do we make sure that we are keeping up to pace with all of that.
Right. In fact, I was going to ask you this question. What is really your take on the current Olympics that's underway in terms of the Indian athletes, in terms of how do you see them when you see them performing versus how are the other athletes? And has the pandemic sort of given a lot of them a level playing field where most of them have come together with this post this pandemic on a level playing field?
Look, so far, I think it's early days in the competition and we probably need a bit more time. I think, generally speaking, we would probably be a little bit disappointed in our performance so far. Numerous world number ones, numerous, top competitors around the world in various different sports have not managed to produce the results that they were looking forward to. I think going back, we're going to realize that the majority of that was because of a lack of competition. So I think a lot of European, North American countries were able to produce more regular competition for their athletes. And that was really what has allowed them to have that competition readiness that we've missed out on here. I don't think we've had nearly as many competitions. I think that our athletes are a little bit rusty, yes, they've had great practice and they're really ready to go and perform. They feel very prepared for competition, but they're competition rusty. And that has various accuracies depending on different sports. Some sports are, going into this Olympic Games with hardly any preparation in the last 12 to 18 months. And other sports are going in with a lot more preparation. But by and large, I think that we really would find that we're going to be a little shy on competition at the end of the day.
Right. I'm going to ask you perhaps a little silly question. We often relate fitness with weight loss and being skinny. I would like to hear from you, your take in this context of how do you define fitness?
Yeah. So look, if we're talking in a general sense, then fitness is very general. And by that, you just have to make sure that your body weight is within an acceptable range. And it's very easy to figure that out if you use Google. It's based on your height and a couple of other metrics. Body composition is one level that goes a little bit deeper because you want to have the right proportion of muscle and fat. So, some people can look very skinny, but have an inappropriate distribution of their fat, which increases their exposure to chronic diseases of lifestyle. And then beyond that, really, you need to make sure that you're eating healthy, getting enough sleep, and getting the appropriate amount of exercise. I think the World Health Organization, I don't know, it depends on what you read and when you read it, but really between 30 to 60 minutes of activity, especially young people below the ages of 16 need to be doing 60 minutes of physical activity every day. As we age and as careers and life gets more and more complicated, that can drop down to somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes, and maybe it doesn't have to be 7 days a week. It could be more like 5 days a week. But we need to be keeping ourselves very fit and active. And I think it's easy to say that, especially because of, the fact that some people have to travel a long way to get to work, and they have to work a lot of hours. And in India, we work 6 days a week very often. So there's a lot of things that eat into the time availability. But yes, in an ideal scenario, we would be looking to make sure that we are engaged in physical activity for 30 to 60 minutes, 5 to 7 days a week, eating healthy, getting 6 to 7 hours of sleep a day. I think these are fundamentally important.
So before we end, I'd like to ask you to give us probably some tips or some tricks in which we either as general public or perhaps as sports players can keep fit, can prevent injury, and also enhance performance.
Yeah, so I think that for me, what I've noticed working with elite business people and successful people within the business world and successful athletes within, the sports world, they are creatures of routine. So they will make sure that regardless of how busy the day gets, their days normally always start off with exercise. And that's the first thing that they do. And even if it's only 20 or 30 minutes, they make sure that their day starts off like that. So I encourage everybody to try to do whatever it is in terms of exercise as early as possible within the day, so that other things don't distract you and make it easy for you to drop your exercise. You don't need to go to a gym. I think the pandemic has taught a lot of us that you can do a lot of very effective strength and conditioning, base of the pyramid work, just in your own home. You don't even need equipment. You can do a lot of stuff with bodyweight exercises, calisthenics, yoga, just general bodyweight strength and conditioning. And you don't even need a lot of space these days. So I think that we just need to be committed. We need to give it the importance that it needs, to say, I need to look after my health. If I'm healthy, I can do pretty much anything. If I'm not healthy, pretty much the majority of things get ruled out for me, right? I don't have the energy levels or the physicality or the mental vitality or anything to go ahead and do any of my other goals. So look after your health first. Make sure you're doing 30 to 45 minutes, even if it's just bodyweight training every day, and you will lay a great foundation.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for so much information. And there's so much to learn and know from you. And thank you to everyone who's been watching. Stay connected, do subscribe, and do support. Thank you so much, and see you on the other side soon.